Thank you for your patience. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Parker Street Bridge Replacement Project online public meeting. This meeting is being held virtually as allowed by Governor Baker's executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law dated March 12th, 2020. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted online following the meeting. Now I'll ask Alan to from BHB to go over some of the technical aspects for this public meeting.
Great, thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining the meeting today, along with the project team for the Parker Street for the bridge replacement. Excuse me. My name is Alan Dolniak, and as Mike said, I'm with VHB, one of the consultants helping out with the meeting. So before we get started, I wanted to outline the process for participating in the meeting, as well as remind everyone that, like Mike said, this meeting is being recorded and will also be posted online later on. To prevent any disruptions throughout the meeting, your webcam video will be turned off during the meeting, and you're going to be muted by default. And that's just to prevent any sort of unintentional background noise. We are going to open up the meeting for questions and comments after the presentation. And we request that you share only one question or comment at a time, just to give everyone an ample opportunity for their questions. If there's time remaining at the end of the meeting and you do have a follow-on question or comment, you can please signify to us, which I'll cover in just a moment, that you want to speak again or ask another question. Also, if we run out of time, you can use the project's email address, which is parkerstreetbridge@mbta.com. That's Parker and then ST for street, and then bridge, all one word, Parker ST Bridge @mbta.com. As with a standard public meeting in person, we ask people to identify themselves so we have a record of who attended. If your name inside the Zoom panel doesn't accurately represent who we are, one of us might reach out beforehand just to clarify we have a good, accurate first and last name. This would occur, for instance, if you use a different email address or if you're using Zoom online for non-work purposes and we can't clearly identify who you are. If you'd like to submit a typed comment or question for the record, you look for the Q&A button down below in the Zoom panel of controls, which is a Q&A, and you could simply ask your question, and at the appropriate time, we'll read it into the record, and a member of the project team will do their best to respond to your comment or answer your question. Also, we are supporting some verbal comments as well. If you'd like to ask a question verbally into the record, look for the raise hand feature down below, and that will actually pop up a hand inside our panelist list, our attendee list, and we'll see that. And when the time is right, we'll ask you to unmute your microphone, share your name for the record, and then ask your question, and the appropriate person on the project team will respond. If you're joining us by telephone, we also support the ability to ask a question as well. You'll want to use the *9 command. That sends us a command similar to raise hand, and so we'll know that we have someone who's dialing in who would like to ask a question or share a comment. And just as before, at the appropriate time, we'll call out the last few digits of your telephone number. We'll ask you to unmute your microphone, and you can ask your question or read your comment into the record. And finally, if you are an elected official or an elected official's representative here joining us tonight, and you'd like to ask a question or submit a comment, please go ahead and use the Q&A feature at the bottom box of commands, like I mentioned a moment ago, just to let us know that you're in here in attendance or who you're with, and we'll be sure to get to you first after the conclusion of the formal presentation by Mike and the project team. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Mike and the project team to walk us through the presentation.
Thank you, Alan. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Parker Street Bridge Replacement online public meeting. As Alan said, my name is Mike Ryan, and I'm the Senior Project Manager at the MBTA assigned to this design build project. I want to thank you all for your interest in taking the time out of your day to join this public meeting. I'd also like to thank any elected officials or their staff who have also joined us today. We look forward to hearing all your comments and questions after the presentation. First, we will start with an overview of the project, history, scope of work, and schedule of the project. We'll discuss how and when the project work may affect you. This is an important project and a key component to our continuing efforts at the MBTA to improve the state of good repair for our commuter rail system. The Parker Street Bridge was originally built in 1930 and is approaching the end of its useful lifespan. While we are here today to discuss the Parker Street Bridge replacement, I'd like to share that this is part of a larger design build program, which includes replacement of 6 different bridges throughout the commuter rail system. Accompanying me as part of this meeting and representing from the design build team is Gary Orlando from Barletta Heavy Division, Robert Penfield from VHB, and Andrew Burkholder from VHB, who you'll all hear from. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Bob Penfield from VHB.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Right now on the screen that hopefully everyone can see is a slide showing a rough rendering of what the proposed bridge will look like. And just as a kind of a point of clarification, the shading of the steel for the bridge, what's called the superstructure, is shaded blue. And that's just for clarity, so you can see kind of the contours and intricate pieces of the bridge. But in practice and in actuality, it will be black. But that just doesn't show up in the rendering. Go next slide. As Mike mentioned, there'll be a few of us speaking with you today. Mike Ryan is the MBTA project manager for this project and this program. Gary Orlando is the project manager with Barletta Heavy Division, who is the general contractor constructing this bridge. I'm the design manager with VHB, who is working with Barletta and MBTA as the designer for this project. And then Andrew Burkholder, who's our senior engineer, my counterpart, also at VHB. Next slide. So just an outline of what we're going to talk about this afternoon. I'll give you an overview of, as Mike mentioned, this design build program. This is one bridge amongst 6 total as part of this program that are being replaced. And then we'll get into some specifics about the Parker Street Bridge, site location, the existing conditions that impacted the design and construction sequencing, the project needs and goals. We'll describe the proposed bridge layout and the design that went into it. We'll talk in detail about the proposed construction staging, and then also the impacts that would be happening at each one of those phases of construction, and then an overall project schedule. And then we will highlight additional opportunities for public outreach, and then of course take any questions you might have. Next slide. So as you mentioned, the Parker Street Bridge is one project as part of a larger design build program. So the MBTA has combined 6 different bridge replacements into a single design build program. We've got a bridge in Weston, Wellesley, one in Somerville, one in Melrose, one in Lawrence, and then also another one in Lynn. Next slide, please. And they're all located in various locations within the MBTA's commuter rail system. As you can see here, up the top of the page there, on the Haverhill line is our Parker Street Bridge, which is what we're here today to talk about. Next slide. So just to give everyone an idea of the program timeline, back in 2016, the preliminary design of each one of these bridges was ongoing. And in 2017, the MBTA's Capital Delivery Group was looking to accelerate the pace of their projects and their infrastructure improvements. So what they decided to do was take 6 individual projects and combine it into a single large program, and then use design build as the contract delivery method as a way to accelerate the project and encourage more innovation. And all that is, design build is where a contractor and a designer work together to deliver the project kind of at the same time. So during 2018, 2019 was the procurement for that design build program. 9 teams proposed to win it. 3 were shortlisted, and ultimately the Barletta VHB team was selected as the best value. That we also had the highest tech score and the lowest price. From 2019 to 2022 is when we've been progressing the final design and the construction for all 6 of these bridges. So while the individual schedule varies for each bridge location, that full program takes approximately 3 years and should all be complete by August of 2022. But we'll get into some more specific details about the schedule for the Parker Street Bridge in just a little while. Next slide. So here's a map showing the Parker Street Bridge location relative to the streets of Lawrence. Again, it's carrying the Haverhill line over Parker Street, and it's just south of the Merrimack River. Next slide. And what we'll do here is we'll zoom in and we can take a look at some of the existing conditions and site conditions that kind of influence the project. Just advance that for me, Alan. Thank you. All right, again, we're just south of the Merrimack River. And as we zoom in here, you can see the existing bridge, and we've highlighted some different areas here. So the existing bridge at one point carried 5 different tracks. One has been out of service for quite some time. One is called the Old South track that is no longer being used. Track 1 and Track 2 are the MBTA commuter rail system, and then Track 17 carries freight from the Pan Am rail yard just south of this location. You can see the MBTA right away highlighted and shaded in a purple, and then we've got areas shaded in green, which are identifying potential staging areas for how we're going to construct the new bridge. We'll get into a lot more detail here in a little bit to clarify all of that. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Andrew Burkholder, who's going to get into some of the more specifics about the bridge. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Bob. As Mike mentioned, the bridge was built in 1930. You can see a picture of it here on the right side of the screen. It was originally a 5-track structure, and again, as Bob mentioned, only 3 of them are active today. The original bridge consisted with a ballasted deck and then concrete gravity abutments and a sidewalk on each side. These are approximately 9 feet wide on the west and just on the east. You can also see that these sidewalk widths include that existing piers, the steel columns that exist today in the sidewalk just behind the curb. Great picture. Utilities on site include signal and fiber optic that are carried by the bridge. And then overhead, we have PTC wires, which are positive train control wires, and also power is located on overhead wires above the bridge. The railroad operations include 32 commuter trains that use this bridge on any given weekday, and then 12 trains cross the bridge on each day of the weekend. There's also freight rail on track 17, as Bob mentioned. Next slide, please. So why do we need to do this project? And the answer is that the existing bridge is in poor condition. So the steel superstructure is rated a 4 out of 10 on the last inspection report. And so for the MBTA's continuing need to provide a safe and efficient transportation system, we need to replace this bridge to maintain that state of good repair for the T's infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the goals for this project, again, as I mentioned, we want to restore that state of good repair for the T's system. And the replacement structure needs to be one that's resilient and provides a minimum of 75 years of expected service life. And we want to replace this while minimizing impacts to abutters, the commuter rail riders, users of Parker Street, and also the freight operators in the area. Next slide, please. So get into the design a little bit and kind of show you how we're going to do that. So as I mentioned, this is a complete bridge replacement. The track profile and alignment for all 4 tracks that are going back on this bridge, they're not going to be changed. So same horizontal alignment, we're not raising or lowering anything. We are going to use some accelerated bridge construction techniques to again achieve that goal of reducing the impacts to the traveling public and the abutters in the area. The new structure will be a single span and built in front of the existing abutments. So that'll make a little bit more sense in a minute when I show a graphic of that. But one benefit here is we are getting rid of those steel piers that are essentially in the sidewalks today. And all construction is within the existing right-of-way. Next, please. So this graphic at the bottom of the screen is if we were able to cut the bridge in half and look at it as if you were standing in the middle of Parker Street. So a couple things to point out here. The existing abutments are shown in the brownish color on each end. We plan to come in front of those abutments, install micropiles. These are steel round tubes that are drilled down into the ground and into the rock. And these will support the new bridge. You can see those extending at the bottom of the page. We'll then cast new concrete in front of the existing abutments, and one abutment will have a tieback to resist some longitudinal loads. The vertical clearance that we will provide will be 14 feet 6 inches over Parker Street. Next slide, please. So the graphic here at the bottom of this slide is if we were standing up at track level and again able to slice the bridge in half. You can see that the new structure will support 4 tracks. Moving from left to right, it's the old south track, MBTA track 2, MBTA track 1, and then the track 17 or the freight track. You can see that there's 2 separate steel superstructures. So we have a common abutment at each end and then 2 separate steel superstructures to support these 4 tracks. The construction will be a ballasted through girder similar to the existing bridge. Next slide, please. This view is an overhead view of the area of Parker Street right below the bridge, and it's intended to show you the limits of repaving of Parker Street and the reconstruction of the sidewalks that will take place as part of this project. So the orange shading shows the limits of the reconstructed sidewalk, and this coincides with the limits of repaving of Parker Street at the end of the project. Next slide, please. And you saw this view at the beginning, but this is a rendering of what the new bridge might look like or should look like in its final condition. All right, next slide, please. So we want to go through some of the staging and show you exactly how this will get built using those accelerated construction techniques. And this also will help illustrate the impacts to the users both of commuter rail and of Parker Street. So this first slide is just showing the existing conditions with the tracks labeled and Parker Street labeled. This is looking from the south to the north towards the Merrimack River. Next slide, please. So the first step will be to set up a work zone on Parker Street. And this is shown with the concrete barrier and the fencing. The street is wide enough that we can set up this zone at each abutment one at a time and still provide 1 lane in each direction on Parker Street as it is today. Next slide, please. So once this work zone is set up, we are able to go beneath the bridge and using some low headroom equipment, install the tiebacks at the east abutment. Next slide. Can you go to the next one, Alan? Thanks. And now the next step would be to install the micro piles. These are the vertical piles drilled down into the rock. And you can see that, again, the low headroom equipment is able to operate under the existing bridge and install these without disrupting any of the commuter rail traffic. Next, please. Final step at the abutment is to cast the new concrete in front of the existing. This will occur, this is shown at the east abutment, same process, minus the tiebacks will happen at the west abutment. Next slide, please. And we're back to the overhead view showing that new abutment on each side. Next, please. So our next step is to remove a portion of the existing structure. As Bob mentioned, there's 1 abandoned track, 1 track that's not in service. So we're going to remove a portion of the existing bridge that supports those tracks. It gives us room to assemble a new superstructure next to the existing over Parker Street. So this slide is showing us closing those 2 tracks and removing a portion of the existing structure. During this time, Parker Street would be closed over a weekend, and that's to allow crane access and also for safety reasons because of the overhead work. Next slide, please. During that weekend, the existing portion or a portion of the existing bridge would be removed. We would also be excavating and installing some precast concrete approach slabs in preparation for the new superstructure. Next, please. All right, so now those slabs are installed and Parker Street is back open at the end of the weekend. All right, next slide, please. So our next step now is to assemble the northern superstructure next to the existing bridge. So you can see here, again, we need to close Parker Street for a weekend, again, for crane access and because of overhead work. But this closure allows us to assemble the new superstructure next to the existing. So if you go to the next slide, it will show that that is now complete next to the existing bridge. All right, and Parker Street is back open. Next slide, please. So then this next step involves a weekend shutdown of both Parker Street and the commuter rail line. So this would be what we might call a full shutdown, tracks and Parker Street below. These weekend shutdowns would typically be late Friday to early Monday timeframe, and this would allow us to excavate behind the existing or behind the abutments, install the precast approach slabs, remove the remaining portion of the existing northern superstructure. If you go to the next slide, it'll show us installing some SPMTs. These are called, this stands for self-propelled modular transporter, and you can think of it as a big flatbed with lots of wheels that can lift this structure up and drive it into place. So if you go to the next slide, that'll show this bridge is now moved into its final location. Again, all on the same weekend. And then the next step will be to install ballast and track. If you go to the next, Alan, ballast and track there on track 2, and the bridge is then reopened and Parker Street is reopened at the end of the weekend. Next slide, please, which is shown here. So at this point, we have completed the substructure and we have half of the new superstructure. The new steel beams are in place. So the next step is to construct the southern half of the bridge. So next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Okay. So now we've really got it done. We installed the old south track. Next slide. So similar to what we did on the northern side of the bridge, we need to assemble the new superstructure next to the existing over Parker Street. So again, over a weekend closure of Parker Street, we would install some temporary shoring and install and assemble the new superstructure next to the existing. Next, please. So this shows that new superstructure in place, assembled over Parker Street, and we would need to provide some temporary pedestrian access during this stage because we are planning to take some of the sidewalk with shoring towers to support this new superstructure. Next slide, please. So now these activities start on our second full weekend shutdown. Again, shutting down all of the tracks and shutting down Parker Street, for the weekend. This allows us to remove the remaining portion of the southern bridge, as shown here. Next slide, please. We'll install the precast approach slabs at each abutment. Next slide. Install the SPMTs again. Next slide, and then move it into place on the new abutments, and then finally install the ballast and track for these two tracks on the next slide. And at the end of the weekend, Parker Street and all tracks are back open for service. Final step of the project is to repave Parker Street and to reconstruct the sidewalks to the limits that I showed on a previous slide. And then at that point, we are done with this particular bridge site. Next slide. I think Bob is going to go into some of the detours that are going to occur during those outages I mentioned.
All right, thanks, Andrew. As Andrew mentioned, there's essentially 2 weekends where we would be looking to shut down commuter rail service, and there's those 2 weekends and a couple other small instances where we would be looking to shut down Parker Street to vehicular traffic and pedestrian traffic as well. But when we do implement the detour onto Parker Street, we went through and we've created a detour, which will be signed with variable message boards all up at least 2 weeks in advance of any of these shutdowns, so that commuters using the street network of Lawrence, the city of Lawrence, can get around and around that bridge site. So if you were to travel north on Parker Street and approaching the bridge from the south, you would have a detour to take a right onto Market Street, a left on the South Union Street, and then a left onto Merrimack Street. It's a single 1 block detour essentially to get around the site. And then if you were traveling south on Parker Street, just going across the Merrimack River, you'd hit a right onto South Canal Street, a left onto South Broadway, and then a left onto Salem Street to get yourself around Parker Street. But again, these are going to be only for those select weekends. Next slide. So just to give an idea of what the general project schedule will be. Site clearing, site prep will be starting this fall. The foundation work, the installation of the tiebacks, the installation of the micropiles, as Andrew indicated, would be happening winter of this year and into the winter, the start of 2021. The partial demo of the out of service tracks, that removal will happen late fall, early winter of this year as well. The construction and fabrication assembly of the new bridges will be happening spring, summer of 2021. Those new bridges would be then moved into place, their final summer/fall of 2021. And that final site cleanup, restriping, repaving of the road will happen fall of 21. So we're about 1 year away from this all being complete. Next slide. That essentially concludes the presentation, but just wanted to remind everyone there's several ways you can get in touch with us and the project team. There's a project website, it's www.mbta.com/Parker Street Bridge. We have an email service that you can sign up for. You can send us emails, parkerstreetbridge@mbta.com. We also have a 24-hour telephone hotline, the number below there. So we look forward to any questions and comments. But at this point, that concludes our presentation. So we can take questions for this.
Great. Thank you, Bob and team, for that presentation. This is Alan Belniak once again from VHB, and I'm here to facilitate some of the Q&A that should be coming in right about now. So we're going to start by responding to any Q&A that have been submitted in the Q&A feature of the box down below. I just want to give an opportunity to recognize any elected officials or their representatives first. So if you are an elected official coming in here, please just let us know. Just give us an indication. Give me one moment to adjust my audio. Let me check.
I think my audio might be better now. I think I lost my audio battery right during the presentation, and so now I had to quickly switch to something else, but now I'm back. So thank you to my great project team for pointing that out. So hopefully my Q&A is coming in loud and clear. So once again, just to repeat that, thank you. If we have any elected officials in the audience or their representatives, if you want to just use the raise hand feature or the Q&A feature just to let us know that you're here, I'll give that a moment. But what I'd like to do is we do have a couple of questions that are here. So with that, if elected officials do come in a moment, we can turn to them. But first, let's start with one of the questions that came in. And Mike, if this works well for you, I'm going to read the question out loud. Then you can either answer it or have one of the members of the project team answer or respond.
Sounds great, Alan.
Okay, so the first question comes in from Robert Sarabian. Hopefully, Robert, I said your name correctly. And Robert writes, as a daily Haverhill rail commuter, my concerns are the disruptions to the current timetable for Boston inbound.
Robert, thank you for the question and attending tonight. As I think the presentation outlined, the weekday schedule is not intended to be impacted or adjusted because of this project.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Also, another question from Robert that came in as well, but I believe this may have been partially addressed in the presentation from Andrew. Can this bridge project be fabricated offsite and then installed over a weekend like the Route 93 bridge project?
Exactly, yes. As the presentation shown, it is that accelerated method where superstructures are built not in place and then set in place. So the answer to your question is it's very, very close to the Route 93 projects, and actually the MBTA is really using this accelerated method throughout the system, and it's causing less impacts to riders and the local community. Great.
Thank you for that. And speaking of impact, the next question is from Gerard, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, Boggio. Gerard asked, what time of day will the work be performed? That is day or night?
So Gerard, thank you again for joining and for your question. The majority of the work is during normal work days. There are going to be those long weekends that is work around the clock where, like as Bob and Andrew stated, work's going to start very late on a Friday night and work continuous till Monday morning. There may be some other occasional nighttime shifts or weekend shifts, but primarily all this work activity will be in your normal work Monday through Friday workday.
Great, thank you for that. Just a reminder for any of those on the phone who are dialing in, *9 raises your hand. And for anyone in the audience who'd like to ask a question verbally, use the raise hand feature down in the bottom toolbar. But with that, we will continue with the text submitted questions. Next up is Stefan Wunsch. Hopefully I said your name correctly, Stefan. Since the Old South track is currently out of service, is the replacement of that span in the installation of a new track because of a need by the MBTA, or a new freight customer planning to occupy a property on Merrimack Street, or just because of economy of scale?
Thank you for the question. Bob, I may ask for your help because you may know some of the history a little bit better, but I'm going to assume, the MBTA's position is in a lot of the bridges that we design, we are always looking to make sure it's efficient for expansion for future needs. So even though that existing track is not used right now, we'd want to make sure that if we would potentially need it in the future, it would be available. I don't believe there's anything intended to run on that track right now. Bob, do you know a little bit more of the history on that one?
Mike, that's exactly right. We're not aware of any plans to use that track, and it was specifically that, the economy of scale. Now you're building a structure. If you'd have to design the center girder of that cross section to support a future track, or you would essentially preclude a new track from going in. So just again, economy of scale, it hits the nail on the head. That was the reason.
Good question.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you both for that one. The next question we have submitted is from Gerard Boggio again. Will lighting be added under the bridge?
Thank you, Gerard. Bob, I'm not 100% sure on the answer on this one, so I'm going to ask you to fill in for me.
Sure. At this point, there are no plans to install lighting under the bridge. The way the structure will be laid out, you will have space in between kind of the first pair of track, that the two separate bridge superstructures would have a space in between them. But we aren't planning to have any lighting per se under the bridge, other than what's already as part of the street network now, which will all be maintained or replaced as part of the construction work.
Thank you, Bob.
Great, thank you for that. At the moment, that concludes the submitted written Q&A in the Q&A box. Once more, I will just invite people, or remind people rather, that if they'd like to submit a written question, please use the Q&A box, as other folks have already done tonight, or use the raise hand feature, also in the bottom strip of commands, if you'd like to ask a question verbally. And we'll pause for a moment to see if any more questions come in. Okay, Mike and team, I don't see any more questions or notifications for questions or comments at the moment. So I believe if there's nothing else, that may end the Q&A portion. But with that, I will hand it back to Mike for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Alan. Once again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us on this virtual meeting to learn about the project. Alan, we still have, the Parker Street email. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out for that, and the project website for additional information. Please take a note of that, and that will be updated regularly. So if there's no more questions.
That's correct. Our queue is empty. So I think we're complete.
Once again, I just thank everybody for joining, and everybody have a good night.
Great. Thanks everybody for joining.